Hi, my name is Miriam Ching. I am a student at Trinity College, and thank you, Jens, for being here and agreeing to this interview. I'm a part of I'm on steering committee for Student Voices for Refugee, which is a collaboration of students and professionals working to create an accessible and inclusive higher education environment for students from population affected by forced migrations. And we are planning to publish toolkit on World Refugee Day. Can you please introduce yourself to the viewer, and can you give a general overview of the program, including why the scholarship was founded, your mission, and target population?
Thank you, Miriam, for this opportunity and for the kind invitation to this interview. I'm Jens Waltermann. I'm the Executive Director of the United World Colleges International, which is a group of 18 secondary education institutions around the globe, most of them residential, who educate students for the IB diploma program, which is a 2-year intensive university preparation program that I guess most of our listeners will know. The UWC movement has been existing for the last 60 years and works with a mission to unite, to make education a force really to unite people for peace and a sustainable future. So it's a mission-based education organization, drawing students from around about 160 countries across the globe, being selected in country on merit. And to the extent that they need scholarships, we provide them with scholarships to then attend our residential or part residential, part day student educational institutions around the globe. A while back, UWC decided that it wanted to make an active contribution to the current situation of displaced communities, forced migration, and to specifically provide opportunities, education opportunities to talented refugee students, of which there are so many. We decided to set aside about 5% of our total intake into the IB diploma program, supported with full scholarships, to make sure that refugee students selected in their countries of current residence, often that's the countries where they found refuge, to apply and to then attend a United World College somewhere around the globe as an entry point, or as a passageway, if you will, into higher education in many countries around the globe, including in the United States of America, where many of these students end up in US institutions of higher learning, universities and colleges, on what is called the Davis UWC Scholars Program.
Speaking in detail, how is the program funded?
The program is funded through some government contributions to the schools in relevant countries, often in Europe, where public funding for schools is probably more common than for secondary schools, is probably more common than in some other parts of the world, and some very significant private funding from the foundations and from generous philanthropists around the globe who believe in the mission of providing talented students with the opportunity to study at excellent institutions of learning without regard to their socioeconomic origins and their social circumstance. So that at the end of the day, at our institutions, we can foster conversations and engagement and true interaction between students from all walks of life, as we say, from all kinds of socioeconomic backgrounds, including, importantly, I think, a significant refugee population, because refugees don't just get displaced, they get marginalized from view in many countries. And we feel it's important to bring refugee students back to the middle of our societies and to the conscience of education and of their peers in educational institutions, in order to understand the situation of forced migration around the globe, and to get us all thinking about potential solutions to the conundrum of flight and displacement.
Thank you. I'm very grateful that funding exists to help out refugee students that are marginalized, like you said, and continue their education, which is really great. As a follow-up to my previous question, how does the program ensure sustainability?
It is sustainable through the sustained engagement of philanthropy, because while our institutions, of course, have fee-paying students also, if you're covering the entire socioeconomic spectrum, it makes sense to have students and their families pay the fees that they can pay. But in order to keep particularly the refugee program sustainable, it rests on philanthropy, essentially, and in a growing proportion also on the engagement of major philanthropic initiatives like the RISE initiative, funded by the Rhodes Trust and Schmidt Futures, based in the US, and driven by Eric and Wendy Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, funded also by institutions like the European Union, and by a number of governments and philanthropists.
Thank you. Outside of the full university commitment, what other organization have you partnered with, and how do those relationships aid the scholarship program?
Well, we partner as a university pathway. We partner with 100 universities and colleges in the United States through the Davis UWC Scholars Program, including your own university. And at the sourcing end, which I think is also very important to consider, we partner very closely with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, whose chapters and representations in refugee camps help us gain access to potential future students, help us to run selections among these students in the camps, because we often have a lot of applications for the scholarships that we offer, and who help us reach out to talented individuals within the refugee population. That's, of course, not only the job of UNHCR. There's also other partner organizations that support this effort, but much of this is facilitated through the partnership with UNHCR.
Mm-hmm. I did some research on your website, UWC website, and I saw that UNHCR help secure passport and also make sure that the students are safe during their education years.
I think that's very important. Many people who start engaging with refugees and potential refugee students will very quickly find that some of the most difficult obstacles are in travel, and that's not just as a result of COVID more recently. That is a direct result of their insecure status in many countries, and often the fact that they are either undocumented or they have to travel on UNHCR provided papers, refugee papers. But immigration and the securing of visas takes a lot of effort and takes a lot of experience in this context, and is one of the major challenges when you're trying to bring refugees into a particular country. For us, that's become routine because we have representations in all of these countries. We have local committees working with us in 160 countries, including in some of the most, in some of the primary refugee hosting countries in Africa, Turkey, and in the Middle East, or Central America for that matter. But it takes a certain amount of experience and persistence, frankly, when working with your government to secure the visas to have these students join your institutions.
Wow, that sounds a lot of work, and thank you, the UNHCR and your organization for making sure that the students can safely get their educations. You mentioned the target population when giving a general description of the scholarship program. Can you tell us how you identify and recruit qualified students? And I'm really, really curious on this because I'm also a former refugee from Myanmar, and I know a lot of friends in Myanmar that wants to have this opportunity. So, and also to add on that, how do you promote your scholarship initiative to specific population in Myanmar?
Yeah. So the first step in any country would be to find out whether there is a UWC representation, a so-called national committee in that particular country. Unfortunately, I can't tell you off the top of my head, Miriam, whether there is such a committee currently active in Myanmar, because the situation sometimes changes. But we are active in 157 countries currently. So the likelihood is that there is such a national committee in your country or in a neighboring country that can help you. So you seek that out on the web and you launch an application. But obviously, we realize that particularly for refugee students, many of these students will sometimes not think of themselves as a potential student at an international education institution. So you need to do more. You can't just sit there and wait until you receive an application. Right. You very often have to reach out to these refugee populations with the help of partner organizations like UNHCR or other humanitarian organizations working directly with refugees, so that you can basically, use their help in identifying talented students. Right. Get them to tap these students on the shoulder almost to say, look, here is a program that might be interesting for you. Check it out, apply. And I've heard amazing stories from Afghanistan, from Lebanon, from Syria, about students, hearing about this opportunity more or less by chance. A story that was shared not so long ago with me by a Somali refugee was he ended up as a refugee in Kenya. And he was, 14 or 15, an unaccompanied minor at the time. He ended up with a Catholic nun in Kenya on the outskirts of Nairobi, who put this flyer in front of her, of him, and said, look, if you really make an effort in school, you're a smart boy, then I will help you, apply here. Well, it happened to be a flyer of a United World College program. Wow. And it became his dream from the age of 14 to apply to this program and to try his luck in, getting into that education and seeing the world. Mm-hmm. He's now back in Kenya. He graduated about 8 years ago, and working with refugees and spreading the news among Somali refugees in Kenya, of which there are many, too many, and trying to encourage others to follow in his footsteps.
Wow, that's wonderful. On the website, I saw that since I'm from Burma, Myanmar, so I went on the website and I saw that there's a national committee in Myanmar, but it doesn't have much detail on the website. So how, if you're in, for example, if you're in Myanmar, right, and you want to apply this website and this UWC scholarship initiative, right, and but you don't know national committee, can you still get in, even though without the recommendation from like national committee?
Yeah, well, if there is no national committee in the country, it is not as easy.
Okay.
Because what we do is we distribute the scholarship opportunities through the national committee system. So if you are, if there is no national committee in your country, you can apply directly to a school or college, one of the 18 UWC schools or colleges, and you can contact admissions there. But it will be more difficult, I will be honest with you, to get a scholarship, because the schools provide these scholarships through the national committee system, and they're allocated on a yearly basis to different parts of the world and to different countries. But I would, by all means, encourage students who cannot find a national committee contact in their country to contact one of the United World College schools or the UWC International Office in London or Berlin, and to seek further information as to how they might be able to apply.
Okay, thank you. If there is no national committee in Myanmar, let's just say hypothetically, if someone wants to like establish like national committee, how do you go about that?
Well, what often happens is that through some stroke of good luck or coincidence, a Myanmar national will be selected in another country because the family at the time of application lived in another country, or somebody who came from a totally different country ends up in Myanmar working for a company, an aid organization, a non-governmental agency, whichever may be the case. And very often they start, when they realize that there's not a national committee in the country, they will start one in the country. This is what has been happening over the last 20 years in many, many countries. We've increased the number of national committees very significantly, simply through the efforts of alumni who happen to be in country and who want to make this experience accessible to other young people within the country. So, likelihood is that we've had some graduates from Myanmar. UWC has about 60,000 graduates at this point.
Wow.
Around the globe. And so likelihood is that some of them, at least a handful, are somewhere in Myanmar and would be willing to join together to form such a national committee. But as I say, for most refugee situations, we already have a national committee. So I would say that probably for about 90% of all refugee populations around the globe, there will be a national committee in your country. Okay. And if I take the example of Lebanon, for example, there's even a distinct national committee for refugees within Lebanon. Apart from the Lebanese National Committee. That's not the normal procedure in countries, but all of these national committees accept applications from refugees hosted in the country, and we have specifically allocated scholarships for refugees so that they have full access to our program. The latest edition is in Kakuma camp, which is one of the very large camps in Kenya, where we are currently running a preparation program for about 40 young people to try to get them to the point where they can successfully apply to a UWC scholarship in place to ultimately potentially end up at your university. Let's see what happens.
I hope so. I hope so too. I hope. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Please let me know if there's like national committee in Burma, because I have a lot of connection in back home. So please let me know. I would highly appreciate that. And another question that I want to ask is, beyond scholarship, how does the organization support access to higher education? Do you guys provide mentorship? Like what other resources?
But we have realized that it is more difficult for refugees than for other students to find our program, to be the ones that happen to be approached, tapped on the shoulder, as I said, and also that for many of the students in refugee situations, they may have been out of school. Let's remember that while in many refugee situations, elementary schooling and basic schooling is being provided, the provision of secondary schooling is anything but a matter of course. In many, many refugee situations, secondary schooling is limited, sometimes minimal. Many refugees do not enter secondary school as a result and have interrupted schooling histories. And unfortunately, I have to say this tends to be particularly true for girls. So many of the displaced populations around the globe at this point are in the Middle East. And in many instances, this leads to young women being married early with the best intentions of their families because they want to keep them safe. But it leads to them not realizing their full academic potential, not realizing the sorts of academic and educational pathways that they could have followed if they had had the opportunity. So we try to focus very intently
Mm.
on identifying these populations, on publicizing the opportunities that we can give. But obviously, we are only one organization. So I think it needs engagement by many, many educational organizations around the globe, in the US, as much as in other countries, to make sure that we do not lose a generation. It's bad enough that these young people have been displaced. It is completely unfair that they would also lose their educational opportunities as a result of being displaced. And very often, let's remember, they do not have access to the secondary school systems in their host countries. They will be confined to refugee education provision, which very often is minimal. And we really need to work together to change that. And UWC, by setting a target and saying we want to accept 5% of our intake from refugee backgrounds, is trying to set one of those examples as to how one might go about it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, it brings back a lot of memory, because in Malaysia, when I was in Malaysia, I didn't continue my education because I was not a citizen, and I didn't go to school. I didn't went to school for 3 years and a half. I was 8 years, and I saw Malaysian students going and wearing their uniforms, and I'm just like appreciate that, that you guys are doing, like giving resources and to those young girls that have so much potential in the future. And thank you for like helping, let them know that, oh, they can they can get their educations and know what they can do with their life, instead of like being married at a early age. So thank you for that.
But look, I mean, we can provide 200 places
Right.
every year. What we really need
Yeah.
is 200,000 places.
Yes, yes.
And more.
Yes.
And so, that's why I'm trying to emphasize that, we can only do so much. We need more and more organizations to embrace similar programs.
Yeah.
And frankly, we also need governments to understand that providing refugees access to their national education systems is paramount for successful integration.
Right.
These young people are an amazing resource. They can make huge contributions to societies.
Yes.
And unfortunately, in some societies, that is not readily understood.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, I totally agree. I totally agree with everything you said. I'm curious to like how does the organization support completion of higher educations?
Well, we are extremely lucky and fortunate in that we have the targeted UWC Davis UWC Scholars Program, supported by a very generous philanthropist, or philanthropists, I should say. It's Shelby and Gail Davis, who provide around about 1,000 undergraduate scholarships at 100 US universities every year. Mm-hmm. So currently there's between 3,000 and 4,000 students enrolled at US universities on these scholarships. I think it's the single biggest international student scholarship program within the US across these 100 universities. And it is the pathway that has enabled us to provide ongoing opportunities for refugees and other disadvantaged students. Let's not forget, it's not just refugees who need attention who are disadvantaged. There are kids from many different disadvantaged social backgrounds, displaced or not, who need this help. And this program has enabled us to provide a pathway into US universities and colleges for students who have the talent, but who do not have the means and who could never dream of paying for an education in the US. But through the scholarship program, which is jointly funded by the universities that they attend and by the philanthropic donations of the Davis Philanthropies, they are able to attend the institutions and to bring their incredible experience that I think students should know about to the classroom, and change the classroom conversation and change the educational outlook, and help young people in the US realize how privileged they are to be able to attend higher education, funded either by their parents or by a scholarship set aside by their university. I think it's extremely motivating to sit next to somebody who really, in the classroom, who really appreciates being able to learn.
Right, I agree. If you don't mind, can you tell me like the retention rate?
What do you? Sorry, the retention rate.
How
you mean the completion rate in terms of how many graduate, or are you?
Yes.
Okay. Well,
thank you for understanding that. Thank you.
We graduate about 98% of our students with the IB diploma. So almost all of our students manage to get the IB diploma. We make it our foremost goal to ensure that every student, if at all possible, attending UWC will also complete an IB diploma. And I think it's fair to say that if you can complete your IB diploma, which is a very, very prestigious secondary education degree, you will find a place at university, particularly when there's a scholarship program. For the few students, and unfortunately there are some from refugee backgrounds, for example, who do not manage to complete a whole IB diploma,
Right.
they get what is called certificates of the International Baccalaureate. And in many circumstances, US universities are willing to accept students based on these certificates. Because at the end of the day, what you have to look at is not where a student ends up in terms of total attainment at the end of their high school education, but
Right.
what distance have they covered from between where they came from 2 years ago to where they end up in terms of their IB diploma. And I can tell you that for some of the refugees who do not complete their diploma, the journey is among the steepest in terms of the distance that they covered from point of entry
Right.
and point of exit from our system. So you give them another 2 years at a US undergraduate program, and they will surpass their peers in terms of learning because their gradient is so steep. So always look at the distance being covered between entry and exit, and not just at the outcome at the point of exit. I think that's something that admissions directors at many US universities have understood. And that's why they're willing to accept students, even on incomplete IB diplomas, because they know that with that distance covered, they will ultimately make it in undergraduate studies.
Right. Thank you. So beside like financial scholarship, like what kind of services and support do students receive during the school years, like throughout their distance coverage, like you said?
I mean, very often. Well, first of all, it starts with the support in finding them.
Right.
You need people going out looking for the right applicants and encouraging them to apply.
Right.
And for many universities, these would naturally be their alumni, because there are alumni in so many countries. The Rhodes program, the Rhodes Trust program, one of the most famous international scholarship programs at Oxford University, relies heavily on its alumni to go out and encourage young people to apply as the next generation of Rhodes scholars. So alumni, I think, are a critical component. That's the first piece that you need. The next piece that you need is you need good administrators with good connections into the governments and into the visa departments of their foreign office to secure the visas. So that's your next critical component.
Right.
And then once the students have actually arrived on campus, you need to make sure that you can deal with their very specific situation.
Right.
Sometimes language support is needed. Now that's less the case if they're graduates of the UWC system. Then they will speak close to perfect English by the time they come to US universities. But obviously that's not true for many other applicants. So language support, support for English as a foreign language, essential to the success of these students, and they will learn quickly if given the opportunity. We have students who entered the system with no English whatsoever, and within 2 to 3 months they are able to follow instruction in English, no problem.
Yes.
But you need to make the effort. You need to give them the opportunity, and you need to give them support, targeted support. The next critical piece is to also be mindful that many of these students have been through highly traumatic experiences. So PTSD is an issue. Mental health support is essential. But to be honest with you, I'm not even sure that refugees on the whole statistically need more mental health support than US students. Mental health issues among young people have become a bigger and bigger issue, and rightly so. And I think many universities have geared up their mental health provision to make sure that they can cater for that. We have had to do that too at United World Colleges. All of our institutions now have a professional set of mental health advisors and experts, and they're networked between the different schools, so they can draw on a reservoir of colleagues to make sure that they can exchange their experiences. But this is another essential component, to be able to look after their needs. But as I say, the resilience of some of these students is so amazing and so admirable that on average, I don't think they need more support than US students, domestic students. They may need slightly different support. I think that's important to realize. And then at the end of the day, I think it's important to help them secure a visa or residential status within the country, because unlike other students, it is not a matter of course that a refugee can return to their home country. Right. Let's remember that many of these countries are still in turmoil. Right. It is impossible for students to return. So we need to make sure as institutions of learning, that these students don't end up sort of on the street not knowing where to go next. Right. So I think it's particularly important for universities to work through their placement offices, their career offices, and through targeted visa support to ensure that these students have a follow-on option to their university education.
Thank you. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Now, like for those like who are graduate, like does your organization maintain relationship with alumni that graduated from your program? And I'm curious to like how they're doing now and what are they doing?
Yeah, we try to maintain as close a relationship as we can, as many institutions will. I mean, alumni are one of the greatest resources that all of our institutions have, and I think that is a realization that is widespread at this point. I wish it were as widespread in my home country in Germany, where universities are only slowly learning that it makes sense to care about your alumni and look after them. But because they're public universities, I guess the incentive isn't as great because you don't rely as much on their donations and on their giving to build your endowments and your scholarship funding. In the US, I think this is widely understood, and at UWC it certainly is. And so in maintaining contact, we see that many of these students will stay in the country where they finished their higher learning, the university degree, for a certain number of years for a first step into their careers, or maybe even for a good part of their career. But we also see that many of these students, anywhere 70% upwards, will ultimately return to their home countries, and will want to stay connected with their home country and make a difference in their home country, because very often they realize that they have been incredibly fortunate, and many of their peers have not, and have not been able to get the same kind of opportunities. So we see many, and UWC is a relatively young organization at 60. So we see many of our graduates returning to home countries now, when they feel that they, after having gained some professional experience, they can actually make a real difference. They do many things. They run government pension programs. They run businesses and found businesses, run businesses. They work for NGOs, and sometimes they become foreign ministers or heads of state. But obviously, that's the more seldom case. Not all of us are cut out for that.
Thank you. And one last question: what key recommendations from your program can you share with us that will benefit the scholarship portion of our public education campaign?
I think what I said about critical components of a program is really the most important advice that I can share. I think there is significant funding out there for the cause of refugees, and certainly for the cause of education. And so money tends to be the first concern, but once you have the money, there are other critical components to make your program a success. And as I say, pay attention to finding the students and finding the right students. Pay attention to making the travel possible, the entry into the country, the visa. Make sure they can learn enough of the language that they need to know. In your case, it will be English most of the time. And make sure that they get the support that they need from a developed mental health infrastructure. If you've done all that, and you can then send them off into their professional placement after completing university, which I dare say should be easier now in the US than it was for a number of years until very recently. But with the new administration, I think there should be opportunity to do this. And the US, I think, has better understood than most countries around the globe what an asset immigration is to a country, and how recent immigrants, including refugees, can make a very serious difference. Right. Just as a fun fact, I looked at who were the teams that developed COVID vaccines around the globe. And when you look at it, half of them were refugees. Yeah. For the different companies and the different efforts, I know the one in Germany, the one in the UK, even Moderna. You look at some of the people behind these companies, and you look at some of the scientists doing the research to find the COVID vaccines, an incredibly high proportion of refugees among them. So they are the guys who are finding the vaccines that are saving all of us. Keep that in mind when you think about refugee education.
Thank you. Thank you, James, for today. Thank you for advocating for UWC Refugee Initiative Scholarship. And I learned so much from it, and I hope everyone learned too. Thank you. Do you have anything else to say before?
I have to thank you. I think it's a wonderful initiative to draw together resources for inspiration and for best practice sharing. And I haven't come across another initiative like yours, so I really have to commend you on doing this, and to commend your institution, your university, for doing it. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and I hope this can inspire one or the other person, this great initiative, to also provide additional opportunity for refugees. They truly deserve it.
Yes, I totally agree. Thank you.
Thank you.